President Trump's reaction to Canada's support for Palestinian statehood was as predictable as it was petulant. In a July 31st tweet, he proclaimed, "Wow, Canada has just announced that it is backing statehood for Palestine. That will make it very hard for us to make a trade deal with them. Oh, Canada!" By conflating a sovereign nation's diplomatic decision with his own commercial agenda, Trump once again demonstrated his willingness to weaponize U.S. foreign policy for partisan gain. Rather than engage substantively on the merits of Canada's stance or pursue constructive dialogue, he chose to threaten economic retaliation, a reminder that his approach reduces complex international issues to transactional bargaining chips. Following that comment, in a dramatic escalation of trade and security measures, the White House has moved to tighten economic pressure on Canada, accusing its neighbor of failing to stem the flow of lethal opioids and other illicit drugs across the northern border. On July 31st, President Donald J. Trump signed an executive order declaring a national emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to address, among other things, the public health crisis caused by fentanyl and illicit drugs flowing across the northern border into the United States. As a result, he increased the tariff on Canada from 25% to 35%, effective August 1, 2025, explaining that Canada has failed to cooperate in curbing the ongoing flood of fentanyl and other illicit drugs, and it has retaliated against the United States for the president's actions to address this unusual and extraordinary threat to the United States. In the president's words, it became necessary to increase the tariff on Canada from 25% to 35% to effectively address the existing emergency. Under the revised order, goods qualifying for preferential treatment under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement remain exempt from these IEEPA-based tariffs, but any products transshipped to evade the new 35% rate will instead face a transshipment tariff of 40%. The fact sheet emphasizes that given Canada's continued failure to arrest traffickers, seize illicit drugs, or coordinate with U.S. law enforcement, and Canada's retaliation against the United States for the president's actions, further presidential action is necessary and appropriate to protect American lives and the national security and foreign policy of the United States. It notes alarming developments north of the border, Mexican cartels operating fentanyl and nitazene synthesis labs in Canada, domestic superlabs capable of producing 44 to 66 pounds of fentanyl weekly, and fentanyl seizures at the northern border this fiscal year that have already surpassed the total of the previous 3 years combined, seizures that could have killed more than 16 million Americans due to the drug's potency. Moreover, the statement warns that Canada's retaliatory trade measures against the United States further complicate bilateral efforts to address this escalating drug crisis. In response to this move, Canada reacted immediately. Premier Doug Ford has made it abundantly clear that Canada must refuse to accept anything less than a fair outcome in the ongoing tariff disputes with the United States. Now is not the time to roll over, he warned, insisting that we need to stand our ground against measures that threaten Canadian workers and industries. The Premier expressed serious concern over the recent increase in U.S. tariffs to 35%, noting that duties remain in place not only on steel and aluminum, but also on autos, forestry products, and, most recently, copper. While Ford acknowledged that Canada continues to benefit from zero tariffs on all trade that's USMCA compliant, representing over 90% of our American exports, he emphasized that Ottawa must be prepared to respond forcefully. We need to do everything in our power to protect workers, businesses, and communities from the impact of tariffs, he urged, calling on the federal government to hit back with a 50% tariff on U.S. steel and aluminum. Ford also highlighted Canada's strategic importance to the United States, pointing out that we're America's #1 customer in key sectors such as oil and gas, critical minerals, steel and aluminum, electricity, potash, and uranium. We keep millions of Americans working, he noted, stressing that Ottawa must maximize our leverage to counteract President Trump's protectionist measures. To bolster economic resilience, Ford pledged that his government will do whatever is needed to support workers and businesses. He outlined plans to accelerate regulatory approvals, invest in new infrastructure to diversify Canada's trading partners, and onshore production wherever possible. We're building a more competitive, self-reliant and resilient economy by speeding up approvals, building new infrastructure to diversify our trading partners, and onshoring every widget we can to fortify homegrown supply chains, he said. Concluding his remarks, the Premier appealed for unity across the country. Canadian workers and businesses are desperate for certainty. Let's work together, united, to deliver it, Ford declared, underscoring the need for a coordinated national response in the face of escalating trade tensions. Prime Minister Mark Carney responded firmly to President Trump's decision to raise U.S. tariffs to 35% on Canadian exports not covered by the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, or CUSMA. While we are disappointed by this action, Carney emphasized, we remain committed to CUSMA, which is the world's second-largest free trade agreement by trading volume. He pointed out that, thanks to CUSMA, the U.S. average tariff rate on Canadian goods remains one of its lowest for all of its trading partners. Yet he warned that key sectors, including lumber, steel, aluminum, and automobiles, are heavily impacted by U.S. duties and tariffs. To counter those measures, the Canadian government will act to protect Canadian jobs, invest in our industrial competitiveness, buy Canadian, and diversify our export markets. Carney rejected the justification offered by Washington that the tariffs target the cross-border flow of fentanyl. Noting that Canada accounts for only 1% of U.S. fentanyl imports and has been working intensively to further reduce these volumes, he outlined historic investments in border security to arrest drug traffickers, take down transnational gangs, and end migrant smuggling. Those efforts include thousands of new law enforcement and border security officers, aerial surveillance, intelligence and security operations, and the strongest border legislation in our history. We will continue working with the United States to stop the scourge of fentanyl and save lives in both our countries, he pledged. Turning to Canada's domestic agenda, the Prime Minister promised to focus on what Ottawa can control, building Canada strong. He said the federal government, provinces, and territories are collaborating on a series of major nation-building projects with provincial, territorial, and Indigenous partners that have the potential to catalyze over $500 billion of new investments in Canada. Finally, Carney urged Canadians to look inward for economic opportunity. Canadians will be our own best customer, creating more well-paying careers at home, as we strengthen and diversify our trading partnerships throughout the world. We can give ourselves more than any foreign government can ever take away, he concluded, affirming a vision of self-reliance and shared prosperity. Thank you for watching. As an independent channel, we don't have corporate backing. We rely on your support to keep going. If you found this video valuable, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. It really helps more people find our work. Thank you so much for being part of our community. Check out the next video on your screen. We picked it just for you.